So what we're going to do is we're going to talk first about something called biochemistry. That's going to be our next topic. That's going to lead us into a discussion of cells. Okay? And this idea of biochemistry has to do with, well, what do those words mean? Are those prefixes? Bio. What does bio mean? Oh, like that means like biography? Yeah, bio means life. And chemistry is the study of molecules and elements and how they interact. So biochemistry is the study of chemistry as it affects living things. That's what biochemistry is. We're going to talk about some basics of biochemistry here. Okay. So, like we said, it's the study of chemicals and how they relate to living organisms. Living organisms need certain chemicals to survive. They need nutrients. They need energy. They need to break down materials and grow and so forth. So all of that is related to biochemistry. If we think about, remember in 8th grade you learned about elements, the periodic table of elements? The ones that are the most abundant in humans, or not in humans, I should say in all living things, there's 4 elements that are the most common. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. CHON. They make up the vast majority of what you would find in a living organism. And we sometimes categorize these compounds in 2 groups, organic and inorganic. Now, sometimes people get confused because like they think organic and they think like at the grocery store, if you buy some organic produce, that's really a completely different meaning. So that's not really related. In chemistry, when you talk about something being organic, it has carbon in it and it has hydrogen. It has to have both of those things in order to be considered an organic compound. So for example, this is methane, CH4. It has carbon, it has hydrogen, it's organic. Okay. Glucose, if you remember, C6H12O6, has carbon, has hydrogen, it's organic. Okay. Carbohydrates are organic, proteins, okay. Fats, nucleic acids. All of those molecules are organic compounds. So something is inorganic if it's missing hydrogen or it's missing carbon. Like water, H2O. It doesn't have any carbon. That's inorganic. CO2. It's missing hydrogen. It's inorganic. O2. No carbon, no hydrogen. That's inorganic. Salt, NaCl. No carbon, no hydrogen. So it has to have both of those compounds, both of those elements in order to be considered an organic compound. They're usually simpler molecules. Inorganic molecules are usually simpler, smaller molecules. Organic molecules are typically larger. And we'll talk about mostly organic molecules in this unit. So when we look at these elements, like we said, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, that's 96% of what makes up a human body and other living things also. Then there's some other elements that make up about 3.5%, calcium, phosphorus, etc. And then there's some things that are a tiny percentage. They're called trace elements. You can see them at the bottom. Carbon is really, really important. It's a hugely important element for living things. Okay, carbon is sort of the backbone of many molecules that are important to living things. Okay? If you see these diagrams, they show a bunch of different types of compounds, but you see carbon is kind of a central compound here. And carbon's important because there's lots of space for other elements to attach to carbon. It has 4 spots that different molecules or elements can attach. And it can be lots of different shapes. Sometimes it forms a ring, like you see down here, sometimes a straight line, sometimes a branched chain. Okay, so there's a lot of variety to carbon-containing compounds. And the ones that we are going to focus on are these top rows. We're going to talk about kind of each of them. Carbohydrates, which I know you've heard of. Lipids, which are fats. Proteins, nucleic acids, and then some high energy compounds like ATP. And we'll talk about each one kind of one after the other, talk about some of the details and why they're important in living things. This is a good summary of what these types of molecules, where they're found and why they're important. So let's start with carbohydrates. What do you know about carbohydrates in terms of what they're used for? Last night, so today's our first soccer game, I had the team over to my house for a pasta dinner. If you know people like that run road races, like the Boilermakers, sometimes the night before they eat a big meal of pasta, which contains lots of carbohydrates. They're carb loading. What are carbohydrates used for in our bodies? Energy. Yeah, they're used for energy. That's one of their main functions. If you remember back to health class probably, or even 7th grade, you learned 1 gram of a carbohydrate contains 4 calories worth of energy. And it's energy that's usually easily accessible. We can get that energy easily. Carbohydrates break down relatively easily. They give us energy. That's why people eat carbohydrates, before some kind of, athletic event. They also make up parts of our cells, are made of carbohydrates. Some carbohydrates you're probably familiar with, sugars, starches, those are carbohydrates. The word itself, carbo, means carbon, and hydrate means water. Typically, you can recognize that a compound is a carbohydrate if it ends in OSE. O's, like glucose, lactose, okay, cellulose. Those words that end with OSE are typically carbohydrates. And they're made of only 3 things. All carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And you always have a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 hydrogen for every oxygen. Think about it. You probably know glucose, C6H12O6. There's 6 times as much hydrogen as there is oxygen. Here's some examples of different types of carbohydrates. You know glucose because you learn about it in photosynthesis. Sucrose, that's table sugar. Like sugar you have in your house that you put in your coffee, that's called sucrose, it's the name of the carbohydrate. Lactose, is in milk and dairy products. Starch is found in foods. It's a large molecule. Cellulose makes up the cell wall. So talk about those briefly. Monosaccharides are the simplest carbohydrates. Okay? They're the building blocks. Okay? C6H12O6, glucose. This one you should be familiar with. Sometimes we draw in a chemical formula as a hexagon because it forms these ring shapes. Other types of monosaccharides, simple sugars we call them, glucose, which is made of photosynthesis, fructose, which is found often in fruits, so what makes them sweet is a carbohydrate called fructose. Galactose is one. It's also a simple sugar. Here's some examples. This is sort of the symbols we use for it. Disaccharides are two of those put together. A monosaccharide is one of those rings, and a disaccharide is two of them. They're double sugars. This includes things like maltose, lactose, sucrose. All those things are these double sugars. Anyone like malted milkshakes? Ever heard of a malted milkshake?
I think so.
Or malted milk balls? You ever eat Whoppers, that candy?
No.
It's got like chocolate on the outside, then it's like a, I don't know, crusty thing inside. I'm not sure what you call it. But that taste, that comes from maltose, that sugar maltose. And if you go to the ice cream shop and you could get like a chocolate milkshake, or you could get a malted chocolate milkshake, and they put like a scoop of this maltose powder in there, and it gives it like a little bit different flavor. It's good.
Is it better or worse?
I like it better. Some people don't like it. It tastes like a malted milk ball, like that inside stuff.
Is that better for you?
No, it's probably worse for you because it's extra sugar going in. Then if we take a whole bunch of these simple sugars, these monosaccharides, and put them together, we end up with a polysaccharide, a really large molecule. It could be 200 or 2,000 of these monosaccharides linked up together. So it's a really big molecule. This includes starch, which you found in foods that you eat, like bread or crackers or pasta, rice. Also makes up the cell wall of plants, cellulose, and the cell walls and exoskeletons of insects. Our bodies and our livers store up any excess glucose as glycogen, a big polysaccharide. Looks like this. So that's carbohydrates. That's one group of organic molecules. Another one are called lipids, or you might call them fats.
Do you know how to copy these?
Yeah, it's in the Google Classroom. I don't have it printed out though, Francis. So lipids are hydrophobic. What that means is they don't mix well with water. You know, if you pour some oil in water, what happens? Does it mix together? No, it separates. So examples of this are fats. Also, the cell membrane is made of phospholipids. Some hormones are called steroids. They're made of lipids. And lipids are also a molecule that can store a lot of energy. They actually have 9 calories per gram. They're more calorie dense than carbohydrates. You probably learned this in health. That fats hold 9 calories for every gram versus 4 for proteins or carbohydrates. So fats in our body is how we store excess energy. Okay, if we consume more calories than we burn, our bodies store it as fat, a lipid. Here's an example of fats, oils, lard. And probably most people don't know much about lard. You can buy it at the grocery store. It's used for cooking. It's basically animal fat. And it's used sometimes for cooking. Oh, well, I got 2 stories for you guys that involve lipids and my childhood. They're both kind of gross. So when I was a kid, my mom would make meatballs like on Sunday, fry them in oil. And then she would save the oil to use it again like next week, like you could use it a few times. So when I was a kid one morning, she did that, but she put the used up fried meatball oil in an orange juice container. And so I woke up in the morning, my sister and I, and went downstairs. My parents weren't up, and we had cereal, and I poured myself a nice big glass of orange juice, took a big gulp of it, and then puked into the sink because it was not orange juice.
Wait,
it was
totally different color?
No, because it's like, mean, maybe I was tired. It is a different color, but it was in like not a glass. It was in like a plastic cup, so you couldn't see the whole color. And it looked close enough, so I just and then
Disgusting.
yeah, it was horrible. It's gross, especially like if you're not expecting something, and like you think you're gonna drink orange juice, and all of a sudden it's this gloppy goose of meatball infused olive oil. Well, the other story was when I was a kid. My mom. Did you ever see Crisco? It's like it comes in like a tub, and it's basically hydrogenated vegetable oil. It looks like this lard almost. I thought it was frosting. I thought it was like vanilla frosting. And so my mom had in there, I always used to ask her if I could try it because I thought it was vanilla frosting. And she said, no, no, no. Finally, one time I was asking her a million times. She goes, okay, fine, try it. Go ahead. So I got the thing of Crisco and I opened it up and it's in this canister and I put my fingers in there, I scooped out like a big glop of it and put it in my mouth. And it's like this greasy, oily, fatty. And I puked in the sink again.
Such a weird texture.
Yeah, it's just fat because it's pure fat. That's all it is. So it was actually gross. Sorry, you don't look appetized there, Mary. So my guidance to you students, don't drink meatball infused olive oil with your breakfast and don't eat scoopfuls of Crisco vegetable shortening. All right. It's not really that related to science, but proteins. Proteins are hugely important in all living things. They're also called polypeptides because they're made of a bunch of small molecules linked together. Okay, they're found in cell membranes. They make up the cell organelles. Basically, our whole body is made of proteins, like your muscle, all protein. So proteins are really, really important. And they also make up enzymes. Enzymes are a type of protein, and enzymes are really important in chemical reactions within our bodies. Proteins make hormones. Hemoglobin in our blood carries oxidants, a protein. So in living things, almost everything comes back to proteins, so they're really important. We can get energy from proteins, so obviously you know that certain foods have more protein than others, meats and cheeses and things like that. Beans have a lot of protein. Protein can be used for energy. It also has 4 calories per gram like a carbohydrate. But proteins also have in them nitrogen. So if you remember, carbohydrates are just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Proteins have nitrogen in them also. And this nitrogen can actually be harmful to our body. So we need some nitrogen, but if it builds up too much in certain compounds, it can become dangerous. And so when we eat a lot of protein, our liver has to strip off the nitrogen and we need to get rid of it in our urine typically. And so like, have you ever heard of some people might be on like a high protein diet or like a keto diet and they eat like just protein? They try to eat no carbohydrates. Sometimes those kind of diets are hard on a person's liver and kidneys because everything they're consuming has protein in it. Their liver and kidneys have to work extra hard to get rid of that nitrogen away so it doesn't become dangerous. And so sometimes if a person's like having kidney problems, the doctor might put them on a low protein diet so their kidneys don't have to do that work of getting this excess nitrogen out. So proteins are made of a bunch of what we call amino acids. Okay? Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And so proteins do all these different things. This is just a list of the functions that certain proteins have in our bodies. The point is that they do a lot. So they're made of a whole bunch of these amino acids. And an amino acid is a simpler molecule. Okay, we saw it over here. This is one amino acid. It's got carbon, it's got nitrogen, and then it has this other group that can be many different things. Okay? There are exactly 20 amino acids that go into making proteins. Okay? And depending on which amino acids get put together, that's what makes one protein different from another. Some examples. Insulin is a hormone, and we talked about insulin yesterday. It helps our body control blood sugar. Insulin is a protein, a big protein. It's got 254 carbons and 377 hydrogens. It's actually considered a small protein. Another protein has thousands of carbons linked together. Okay, so which amino acids go into making a protein are really important. Hemoglobin, for example, is in our blood. It's what our blood uses to carry oxygen. It attaches to it. And hemoglobin is 574 amino acids linked together. If one of them, okay, this amino acid here, gets changed into a different amino acid, that leads to a disease called sickle cell disease. Okay, it's a mutation that some people happen to be born with. And a person with sickle cell disease, because one of these amino acids out of 574 is incorrect, it changes the shape of that molecule. And it doesn't work as well. And their blood can't carry enough oxygen. And their cells take on this strange shape. And it leads to a whole host of health problems. So this whole disease is caused by just one of those 574 amino acids being incorrect. Okay, so the sequence of these amino acids is really important. Here are the 20 amino acids: glycine, alanine, and you'll see you don't need to know the names of them, but there's 20 of them, so they can be put together in lots of different combinations. Just like there's 26 letters in our alphabet, and you can put them together to make millions and millions of words. The same is true of proteins. They have an alphabet of 20. There's 20 amino acids that you can put together in different orders and different lengths, and that's what makes different types of proteins. One of the most important types of proteins are enzymes. And so you definitely need to know about enzymes. Enzymes are special types of proteins that can speed up a chemical reaction, make it happen faster, make it happen when it otherwise wouldn't. That's called a catalyst. So an enzyme is a catalyst. And they're organic. They're made of proteins. So underline those words, organic catalyst, because sometimes on like the Regents exam, they use, instead of when they ask you a question about an enzyme, they might say an organic catalyst rather than saying enzyme. They really mean the same thing. And enzymes are very specific. Like we just learned about lactase. That's an enzyme. Enzymes typically end with the letters ASE, lactase. What does the enzyme lactase do? It breaks down lactose. But it's specific. This enzyme only breaks down lactose. It can't break down glucose, can't break down starches or proteins. It's very, very specific. And the reason it's very specific is because its shape exactly allows it to connect with. So lactase has this shape. It allows it to connect with lactose and basically break it up into two pieces. That's how enzymes work. They work because of their shape. In this diagram, we can see that. We can see here's the enzyme on the bottom. Now, they don't look like little building blocks, but the idea is there. They have this very specific shape, and this is the molecule it's working on. Like this would be lactose. It's called the substrate. And so they connect together at this spot called the active site, and then the reaction takes place. In this case, it's been split in two. Now notice the enzyme is still here, right? It's not used up. Now a new substrate can connect. and react, and a new one. So they can be used over and over again to do their job. So enzymes are made of proteins. Sometimes they have another little piece called a coenzyme. And again, here's those terms. The active site is where the enzyme and its substrate connect. The substrate is the molecule it acts on. Again, what is this enzyme doing? Something a little different. You look at this diagram on the bottom. What's it doing? Yeah, this, instead of breaking up a large molecule and digesting it, it's taking two smaller molecules and allowing them to bind together. It's still an enzyme. It's still a chemical reaction that it's allowing to happen. Okay? And then this product is released, and now this enzyme, it can do the same thing again. It can bond with two new substrates and create a new product, and it can be used over and over again. Now, it used to be thought that everything connects like a little puzzle. It doesn't actually work that way. Scientists now understand that the shape is kind of rough at first and might not perfectly match, but when everything bonds together, the shape changes, and that's what causes things to come together. So enzymes are important all throughout our body. For example, in our stomach, we have an enzyme called a protease. It breaks down proteins into amino acids. In our small intestine, we have sucrase, which takes sucrose and breaks it into simple sugars. We have lipase, which takes lipids, breaks them up. So we have all of these various enzymes that allow our body to break down and digest these things that we eat. And they're specific. Lactase is one we just learned about. It breaks down lactose. Some of us have lactase in our body, some of us don't. Now, enzymes work better or worse depending on certain conditions. Temperature is important for how enzymes work. Okay. Usually, as temperature increases, if you look at this graph, this is showing how well this enzyme is working. So if you increase temperature, the enzyme works better and better and better. But then what happens up here? What happens if you keep increasing the temperature? Look at the graph. What happens to the graph after the temperature continues increasing? It starts dropping. Because if you heat an enzyme up too much, its shape changes and it no longer works. So every enzyme has an optimum temperature when it works the best. What do you think the optimum temperature for enzymes in our body probably might be? Anyone guess? Anyone home? Most of them work well at body temperature, right? That makes sense. They work best at 98.6. If you get a really, really high fever, what happens is some of the enzymes are not going to function anymore. And your body starts to break down. It can't maintain homeostasis. So all enzymes have an optimum best temperature that they work in. They also have a best pH. pH is a measurement of how acidic something is. 7 is neutral. And what's it like in our stomachs? Are they acidic or basic or neutral? Yeah, they're very acidic. So the enzymes that are in our stomach that are digesting foods there, they work best at a low pH because that means acidic, a low pH. In our mouth, okay, things are pretty much neutral. Neutral is about 7. So the enzymes in our saliva work best around there. In our small intestine, the pH is about 8. It's a little bit basic. So those enzymes work best there. So depending on the conditions, that determines how well these enzymes actually function. And if you heat an enzyme up too much and it gets too hot, it can what's called denature, basically break down. The active site won't function anymore and the enzyme is destroyed. So pH is a scale that goes from 0 to 14. 7 in the middle is neutral. Then our final type of large organic molecule, nucleic acids. Okay, this is our genetic code, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, these nucleic acids give us our genes. Okay, there's two types, DNA and RNA in our body. Deoxyribonucleic acid is DNA, ribonucleic acid is RNA. DNA is found in the nucleus of our cells. It makes up our chromosomes. It's also found in some other places. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, like other molecules, also nitrogen and phosphorus. And these are very large molecules. Okay. They're made of a bunch of smaller molecules that are called nucleotides. Here's one nucleotide. It has a sugar, a phosphate, and then a base. So those nucleotides, they come in a few different versions. This base can either be adenine or thymine, or it might be guanine or cytosine. There's 4 possible bases, and they always match up in pairs together. DNA is a double-sided molecule. It's like a ladder with 2 sides to it that's twisted up to form a double helix. Oops. Okay. It was discovered by 2 scientists in 1953, Watson and Crick were their names. They figured out that DNA is made. You can see over there on the left side of the room, that's a model of a DNA molecule. Okay. What you see here, these are the bases in the middle, and then this is the phosphate and the sugar, which make up the sides of the ladder that's all twisted up. So here you see some other examples of that. Okay, again, some different models. We phosphate the sugar, and then the bases are in the middle. A and T matched up together, and G and C matched up together. We're going to talk a lot more about DNA as we get to our genetics unit. We'll just introduce it here. So that's quite a bit of information here in a little while. But that's our notes on biochemistry. Next period, we'll do a lab, which you're going to sort of model how enzymes work. If you're at home and you want to collect data for the lab, you need a bunch of toothpicks to break up. Okay? You're going to be replicating a toothpick breaking enzyme. I have toothpicks for people in class. And if you don't have toothpicks, or if you don't want to just break a bunch of toothpicks because your parents are going to get mad at you, then I'll just share our data with you as we get there. Okay? But that's all for this period. We'll come back after lunch and we'll do that lab and watch one video. Any questions?
Can you go back to that first nucleic acid?
Yep. Just give me one sec. All right. People on Zoom, I'll see you after lunch.